Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. So, what should we wish for? Son Goten stared at the small orange-red orbs that lay in a pile in front of the two boys. He placed a hand behind his head and scratched a spot. The thick, black spikes that sprayed out in all directions stubbornly refused to be displaced, even by this casual gesture. Sitting beside him, the purple-haired boy glanced over at his best friend, who looked so much like his father at that point that it was almost funny. Trunks briefly shrugged. We could always wish for more toys, he hazarded. It wasn't really important since they had only gathered the Dragon Balls for the sake of something to do, not out of any real need for them. Surprisingly, Goten shook his head. Nah, it needs to be something bigger than that. The little Demi-Sai locked his innocent black eyes on his older friend's startled blue eyes. It wasn't like Goten to actually think seriously about something, which was exactly what he was doing by the look in his eyes. Goten's brows furrowed a little in concentration. Just as Trunks was about to say something, Goten's eyes lit up and he grinned the famous sun grin TM. I know, he shouted enthusiastically. I've always kinda wondered what my grandpa was like. What do you mean, Goten? Trunks was thoroughly confused. Don't you live near your grandpa Ox King? No, stupid. Not that grandpa. Goten whacked Trunks on the back of his head in annoyance, although inwardly he was gleeful that for once he was the one correcting his friend's mistake and not the other way around. I'm talking about my dad's dad. I don't even know his name, you know? Ooh, now I get it, Trunks said, his eyes turning thoughtful, as he pondered what it would be like to meet the famous Son Goku's father. He didn't think long before he grinned widely to match the expression on Goten's face. That would be cool, but we have two wishes. Remember, what'll we do with the other wish? Goten thought about it for a moment before wisely proclaiming, we could wish for toys and to meet my grandpa. Both Demi-Saiyans grinned in agreement, then turned to face the Dragon Balls, preparing to make their wishes. Bardock panted heavily as he faced off against Frieza. Despair wrenched the proud Saiyan's gut as he watched the glowing death ball swell on the tip of the purple and pink monster's finger. No one had believed him when he had said that Frieza was going to destroy Vegeta-sei, that the Lord whom they had served for so many years would betray them. Now it didn't matter what he said or did. All he could do was give his life for the world that had given birth to him and so many others. In these last few moments of life, Bardock regretted the acts of evil he had committed in his life. He wished that he could see his two sons before he died, but that wasn't going to happen. It was too late. Wait, Goten, Trunks cried out before Goten could start speaking. The 8-year-old looked quizzically at the 9-year-old, wondering what he wanted. Maybe we should use the other wish to get lots of good food. Your grandpa might be hungry after being dead so long. Hey, you're right, Trunks, Goten exclaimed in admiration. I know I'd be hungry if I hadn't gotten to eat in years, or however long my grandpa's been dead. Okay, let's do it. Grinning, he looked at the orange balls on the ground in front of them and said, trying to sound dramatic, Arise, dragon, and grant our wishes. The spheres glowed brightly, too brightly for the friends to look at. From the center of the 7 balls, a serpentine form emerged and grew. It expanded to fill the darkened heavens, taller than any building the boys had ever seen, with green scales and glowing red eyes. Those twin orbs stared down at the kids. You have 2 wishes, what do you wish for? The dragon's voice rumbled like thunder, thrumming in their blood. I wish for a big feast with lots of yummy food and stuff to drink, Goten said, trying unsuccessfully not to drool at the thought of the kind of food a wish-fulfilling dragon could bring. The dragon's eyes flashed, and the meadow in which the 2 boys sat was suddenly filled with baskets and bowls of wonderful-smelling food and pitchers of liquids. Goten's and Trunks' bellies grumbled in response to the sudden aroma filling the air. It is done! Name your second wish. Ignoring the food was hard, but somehow both Trunks and Goten did so. After all, there was something more important to be done. I wish, Goten stated, his heart pounding in anticipation, that I could meet my dad's dad. The eternal dragon's eyes flashed again. It is done, farewell. With that, the dragon disappeared, and the Dragon Balls shot off into 7 different directions to lie dormant for a year before they could be gathered and used again. Trunks looked around, eager to meet the father of one of the strongest men in the universe. At first he saw nothing, other than the magnificent spread of food. He turned to say something to Goten, but stopped. his eyes wide with horror. Goten was gone. His vision swam, causing the little Demisaiyan to close his eyes before he got dizzy. When he opened them again, everything around him had changed. He was no longer in a meadow, but floating in the air above a strange world that didn't look like Earth. Although he was thoroughly confused, thankfully his danger senses were still working fine. Goten's eyes flicked immediately to the large key in front of him and widened as he saw the death ball dancing on the strange alien's finger. Frieza, too busy laughing his victory over the stupid monkeys, didn't notice the small Saiyan boy appear from out of nowhere. "Goodbye, monkeys," he howled with wicked glee, launching the planet-killing ball of Kia down at Vegeta-sei. Coincidentally, Goten was right in the ball's path. Goten panicked. He was suddenly floating above a strange world, and a strange alien was launching a potentially deadly blast right at him. Fortunately for him, he'd been trained well, so while his mind was blank from shock, his reflexes kicked in, and he batted the sphere of energy straight back into Frieza. Unfortunately for the space tyrant, he was only in his first form, and he was unprepared for this unexpected turn of events. He only had time for fleeting surprise to cross his cruel features before he was consumed by his own lethal attack. An unearthly shriek of pain escaped from his lips before he was obliterated. In the air above Vegeta-sei, two figures floated, both very confused, though for different reasons. Bardock simply stared at the child in front of him, who was apparently unaware of his presence. It hadn't quite registered in his mind that this child, had just defeated the strongest creature in the known universe. All he knew was that, for some reason, the fate of Vegeta-sei had somehow been diverted, and there was a child up here in the middle of the remnants of a battlefield. Certainly no place for a small child such as this. Goten, however, was wondering just what had gone wrong with his wish. "Oh, crud. Oh, crud. Oh, crud." Trunks stared numbly at the spot. Goten had been sitting in not more than a minute ago. It had taken him about 10 seconds to realize that his best friend was gone, and another 20 seconds for it to dawn on him what that meant. Goten didn't tell the dragon where he wanted to meet his grandpa. Oh, crud. Visions of the innocent little Demisaiyan, lost in the depths of hell, flashed through the 9-year-old's head as he rocked back and forth slightly in shock. Trunks was fairly certain that Goten's grandpa would be in hell. His father, Vegeta, said that was where most Saiyans ended up. Trunks was brought out of his stupor by a sudden flash of insight. His eyes widened further as he realized the implications of what had just happened. "My parents are gonna kill me," he yelped out loud. "Goten and I didn't ask permission to go searching for the Dragon Balls. What'll they say when I show up and tell them, 'Hey Mom, hey Dad, Goten and I ran off without telling you where we were going. Then we used the Dragon Balls and accidentally wished Goten into hell. Oh man, I am so dead." He moaned and buried his head in his hands. Another thought formed in the boy's head. Something even worse than the previous thoughts, if that was possible. "Oh no," he whispered, suddenly quite still, frozen in terror at the mere idea. What will happen when Chi-Chi finds out? Bardock stared at the back of the little Saiyan boy who shouldn't have been allowed anywhere near this battlefield, let alone in the middle of it. The kid was currently looking around with unhidden curiosity, as if he sensed Bardock's eyes on him. The tailed child turned around and Bardock came face to face with itself? What the hell? The boy who looked at him quizzically had Bardock's spiky, every which way hair, his obsidian black eyes, his nose, his mouth, his face. Everything about the boy looked like a young version of Bardock himself, though the kid had no scar on his cheek, as the older Saiyan did. Bardock was starting to question his sanity right about now. Frieza was gone, and now he was face to face with a little version of himself. Maybe this was another one of those visions, or maybe he was dead and had gone to hell. Maybe he was still recovering from that last mission, and the past events were really just a bad dream. These thoughts were dispelled when the little Bardock did a very un-Bardock-like thing. His eyes widened and he grinned. A rather silly grin, as though he'd just gotten into the cookie jar. "You look like Tuzin," the boy chirped, forever banishing from Bardock's mind any suspicions that this might actually be a younger version of himself. Unfortunately, no new suspicions popped into his head to replace the old ones, leaving one very confused Bardock. "Huh? What's a Tuzin?" Bardock tested out the unfamiliar word as he placed a hand behind his head in an unconscious gesture of puzzlement. Despite his green Saiyan armor, he looked to Goten almost exactly like Goku did when he was confused. "A Tuzin is a dad. Goten explained patiently. A moment passed as Bardock let this sink in. He eyed Goten thoughtfully. He looks just like me, and he can't be that old, considering how short he is. Wait a second. Bardock looked very startled as he remembered something. Kakarot, he gasped, finally making the connection between this kid who looked like him and the son he had sent off to some backwater planet a few years past. An, how old is Goku at this point? If you know, let me know, please. Until I find out, I'll just go with 6 or 7 years old. This kid looked to be about the age his son would be at this point. Could it be? But how? Karat? What? Where? Goten's eyes darted around, looking for the aforementioned food. Maybe some of that delicious feast he and Trunks had wished for had come along for the ride. Much to the little Sang's disappointment, there was no sight of anything edible in the immediate vicinity. Darn, I knew I should have eaten some of that feast before I made the second wish. It hadn't really been that long since he'd eaten breakfast, but he could always eat more food. It was Goten's lot in life to be perpetually hungry. No, you're Kakarot, Bardock said, the corner of his mouth twitching ever so slightly. I am? Goten was confused. He scratched the back of his head in the famous hereditary gesture only his family could pull off. But I thought I was Goten. This made Bardock frown. But you look like my son, Kakarot, and you just said that I looked like your father. Goten slapped his head with one hand, grinning in realization. Oh, Veggie-chan calls my dad Kakarot. You must be my grandpa. My wish did come true, after all. And here I thought something went wrong. With that said, the little Bardock look-alike zipped through the air and into his greatly surprised grandfather's arms. He wrapped his short arms around Bardock's neck, grinning into the older Saiyan's confused face. I'm Son Goten. It's nice to meet you, Grandpa. If Goten had been paying attention, he would have noticed that Bardock was, 1, having trouble breathing. Goten was hanging onto his neck, after all. 2, he would have seen a bewildered expression on his grandpa's face. Grandpa? What the hell is this kid talking about? I'm barely old enough to have 2 kids, let alone grandchildren. I'm Bardock. And what kind of a name is Son Goten? Bardock asked the first question that surfaced in his mind. You could hardly blame the guy for being disoriented. It's the one my daddy gave to me, of course, Goten said, as though this was the most obvious thing in the world. In Goten's mind, it was. Fortunately for Bardock, the Demi-Saiyan noticed that he was hugging his grandfather's neck just a little too tightly, and he loosened his grip. Thank goodness there aren't any other Saiyans up here, Bardock mused to himself. Even though it looks like Frieza isn't going to kill me, I'd die of embarrassment at being caught with this kid, hugging me, and grinning like an idiot, too. Any gods out there care to tell me just how in hell a Saiyan child can be raised to behave like this? And how in the world did he get to be so strong? I'm not exactly a weakling, and just having this kid hanging onto my neck nearly made me choke. Bardock paused at that thought. The kid was strong, and he'd been in the path of that death ball Frieza had flung at Vegeta-sei, and the attack had been bounced right back at the lizard. By this boy? Surely not. But how else could the attack have been turned back on Frieza? No one else had been anywhere near the blast. Could this boy really be strong enough to defeat Frieza? Bardock hastily detached Goten from his neck and held him out at arm's length. Examining him, once again he was struck by the uncanny resemblance the child had with himself, and by the lack of resemblance. This boy's face was too innocent, too open to be his own face. Bardock had no doubt that this boy made a poor liar, though how that could be true for any Saiyan was beyond him. If you're my grandson, he said, suspicious, but deciding to play along with the kid's story for now. How is it that you're here, when my son Kakarot, the one you claim is your father, is barely as old as you, if that? Well, ye see, Goten began, suddenly looking rather guilty. Me and Trunks made a wish on the Dragon Balls, that I could meet you. I guess the dragon sent me to the past instead of bring you to meet me. Maybe I should have been more careful in how I made that wish. He looked up at his grandpa's blank, uncomprehending face. This was going to take a lot of explaining, he could tell. He opened his mouth to say more when his stomach interrupted him loudly. The little Demi-Saiyan grinned sheepishly. I don't suppose we could go find something to eat, huh? A large sweat drop trailed down the back of Bardock's head. Maybe the boy was more Saiyan than first impressions indicated. Bardock's stomach growled, too. Okay, We'll find something to eat, and then you can tell me just what the hell you mean by Dragon Balls and wishes and everything else. Bardock was still suspicious of this brat. But hey, a full stomach just might be what he needed to clear his head. Goten scowled. If his Katsun had heard his grandpa using language like that, she'd be on him with her frying pan in an instant. His stomach growled again, louder this time, and he decided to ignore the bad word for now. Some things were definitely more important, like food. Together, the two Saiyans descended from the battlefield in the sky. Bardock in the lead with Goten trailing not far behind, one troubled, the other happily oblivious. So let me get this straight. Bardock swallowed a chunk of meat, taking a swig of ale to wash it down. You and the son of... He paused, looking around to make sure no one was listening in on the conversation, then lowered his voice. Vegeta-sei used these 7 wish-granting balls to wish for food and for you to meet me, your grandfather. And this eternal dragon sent you to the past, which is my present. And in your time, Vegeta-sei was destroyed by Frieza, leaving only Kakarot, Vegeta, and 2 others who are dead now as the only Saiyajin alive in the entire universe. The elder Saiyan shook his head disbelievingly as the younger Saiyan slurped his soup and nodded eagerly. Bits of stew dribbled down the front of his orange gear. If it weren't for the fact that Frieza nearly did destroy all of Vegeta-sei, and the fact that I don't think you could lie if your life depended on it, I don't think I'd believe you. I believe him. Damn it, I must be losing my mind. A half-Saiyan from the future, who just happens to be stronger than the most feared creature in the known universe, and he's my grandson. The older warrior sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He could feel a headache coming on. Listening with only one ear, he heard Goten tell him stories about his other son, Raditz, and Vegeta-sei's first visit to Earth. Then Frieza and the 5 androids of Dr. Gero. 1621. Cell, made up of the most powerful beings in the universe, including Kakarot, Vegeta-sei, Frieza, and his father King Cold, defeated by an 11-year-old boy, son Gohan, another grandson of Bardock's. It was all more than the Saiyan could handle right now. I need something stiffer than L, he thought to himself, then looked over at the young, impressionable child sitting across the table. Damn, have to set a good example for the kid. Kids shouldn't be drinking heavy stuff at that age. And he might decide that whatever I do, he can do, since I'm his grandpa. Damn it all. The talkative Goten was in the middle of telling his grandfather about some prank or other that he and his friend Trunks had played, and he was so mad you should have seen his face. Ha ha ha! It was so funny. When I saw Vegeta-san with pink hair, I thought I'd die laughing. And me and Trunks got pictures. We have them stashed away somewhere where he'd never find them, or Vegeta would blast them to bits. Boom! And then we wouldn't have anything to blackmail him with anymore. Bardock couldn't help but think that these 2 kids had a death wish. Pouring neon pink dye into the hair cleanser that the Prince of all Saiyajin used. As highly as he respected his prince, though, the thought of him with bright pink hair was amusing enough that even he nearly burst out laughing. It took a lot of self-control to contain his mirth. They were in a public eating place, after all. Goten, Bardock started to say, cutting the youngster off before he could start into another tale of his and Trunks' misadventures. We can't go around telling everyone you're my grandson, you know. People already think I'm crazy because I tried to warn them about Frieza. Since Frieza did attack Vegeta-sei, they've started to change their minds about that. No need to convince them otherwise. Even I find it hard to believe that you're from the future. I don't know if we're going to be able to get you back to where you belong, but until we can figure out what to do, I need you to pretend that you really are my son, Kakarot. Okay? It could work. The boy definitely looked like Kakarot. And with his ability to suppress his ki, he could fool the scouters into thinking he really was a third-class warrior's son. The only problem was the boy's difficulty in lying. So you'd be my Tusen. Goten queried. That was easy enough. Bardock looked almost exactly like Goku. He thought for a minute. And I'd pretend to be my dad. That'd be cool. Everyone always thought he looked like a mini Goku anyway, and he'd always liked the idea of trying to be just like his dad. The only difficulty he could see was that he wasn't used to his dad being called Kakarot, except by Vegeta-san. But that was another story entirely. Nor was he used to being called anything other than Goten, or spawn of Kakarot, in Vegeta's case. Still, how hard could it be? Right, Bardock agreed. I'll call you Kakarot from now on. Okay? And you just call me father. Okay? One problem solved. For now to figure out how to get this kid back to where he came from before this situation has a chance to get worse. You'll live with me until I can straighten out this mess. It's a damn good thing his friend Trunks didn't come to the past with him, given what trouble Goten, Kakarot, says he gets into when they're together. I can only imagine the headaches I'd get trying to keep a low profile. Okay, Tuzian, Goten chirped enthusiastically. Paying the bill for the meal the two had eaten, the taller Saiyan warrior led his charge out of the restaurant and towards the section of the city where he had a small apartment that he liked to call home. Sleep would be a good thing right now, especially since he didn't have the liberty to get himself dead drunk. No, he had a feeling he would need to be sober and well rested so he could keep an eye on the troublemaker who had suddenly become a part of his life. Thunder sounded in the distance as the first drops of rain splattered against Trunks' skin. He didn't care. Rain fit his mood really well right now. In just a few short minutes he'd be home. -1 Son Goten. In just a few short minutes he'd have to tell everyone what had happened. The thunder, lightning, and rain sounded like a funeral dirge to the purple-haired Saiyan's ears. Close enough. By the time the 9-year-old put his hand on the front door of Capsule Corporation HQ, he was soaked to the skin and shivering from the cold. He opened the door and stepped inside. The door shut behind him, blocking out the storm, sealing his doom. "Where the hell have you been?" Trunks cringed at the familiar piercing screech that was his mother's voice. Man, can she yell? He thought dully. You and Goten told me you were going to play hide-and-seek, and you've been gone for days. Chi-Chi's been driving me up the wall with her constant worrying, and you have the nerve to show up, dripping water all over the floor after 3 days without telling anyone where you were. Bulma fumed, shaking her fist under her son's nose. Not that she could really do that much damage even if she did hit him. And I don't suppose you had anything to do with the Eternal Dragon appearing, now did you? She added, her voice dangerously low. The look in her eyes could have melted glaciers. Trunks stared at his feet, his tail curling in guilt around on of his legs. Behind the blue-haired human, his father leaned against a wall, his arms folded, acting indifferent. His eyes, too, were latched onto the squirming Demi-Saiyan. And where's Goten? Bulma looked behind her son at the closed door, as though expecting it to open and the other half of the mischievous duo to come running through it at any moment, laughing about some private joke or other. Trunks' heart leapt into his throat, and tears sprang to his eyes. All thoughts of his father's lessons that tears were a sign of weakness were forgotten as the events of the past few days once again unfolded within the young boy's mind. In hell, he whispered, nearly choking on those 2 words. No longer able to hold back the tears streaming from his liquid blue eyes, he rushed forward and hugged his cousin fiercely, burying his face in her bosom as sobs racked his small frame. His mother's anger quickly drained from her own eyes as he brokenly told his parents the events of the past 3 days and the misspoken wish his friend had made. Horror replaced it instead. Even Vegeta's eyes looked slightly troubled, though heaven help the person who pointed that out to him. Ru-Ying. Bulma had a sinking feeling in her stomach, that it was Chachi calling, yet again to see if the boys had shown up yet. Riang. Trunks, she said, proud that her voice didn't tremble. Answer the phone. Ruyang. Yes, Katsun, he whispered, not trusting his voice. He walked over to the phone and picked it up before it could ring again. Taking in a ragged breath, he prepared himself for what was sure to be one of the worst times of his short life. Moshi Moshi, Brief's residence, he said into the receiver. Moshi, Brief's residence, Trunks answered the phone. He closed his eyes, waiting for the inevitable storm of rage and verbal abuse that was Sanshouchi. Maybe if he held the phone away from his ears, he could get through this without going deaf. Hi there! I'm calling on behalf of Waves and Rocks Satellite TV. We have a brand new satellite dish that for a moderate fee, we can install in your home. With this new dish, you'll have the ability to receive thousands of channels from all over the world. At this point, Trunks stopped listening. He stared incredulously at the phone in his hands, mouth hanging open in surprise. It wasn't Chi-Chi. It was a telemarketer. And if you subscribe now... If you ever call this house again, Trunks interrupted in a fit of rage, his voice escalating to rival his mother's, I'll rig the phone to send a feedback loop that'll make your phone explode in your face. The person on the other end hastily hung up. Bulma scowled at Trunks. What? It was a telemarketer, and besides, Trunks explained sheepishly, we already have what they were trying to sell us. The frown on his mother's face lightened. Cammy knows she herself has a short enough temper when it comes to telemarketers. Still, I didn't know you could rig a feedback that would produce those results. Bulma was intrigued by the idea. I can't, Trunks smirked. But they don't know that. Vegeta smirked at his son with pride. The brat definitely took after his father. I wonder if I could make a device that did something like that. Bulma's eyes glazed over in thought. Maybe if She trailed off, taking a few steps in the direction of her lab, her mind already racing at light speed. The purple-topped MSIEN heaved a sigh of relief. It looked like his death sentence had been postponed. Bam! 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 Bulma! I know you're in there. Open this door right now or I'll break it down myself. All three occupants of the room flinched. Vegeta hastily vacated the room, muttering something about having to train to show that Baka third-class Saiyajin, who is the strongest. Bulma turned back to her son, a dangerous gleam in her eyes. Trunks, as punishment, you get to answer the door and tell Chi-Chi what happened. That said, she quickly retreated to the far side of the room and sat on the couch. She felt that she needed to be there to make sure things didn't get too out of hand, and to make sure that Trunks told Chi-Chi the truth. Trunks, resigned to his fate, miserably approached the door and opened it to find a startled Chi-Chi, her hand raised, as if about to start pounding on the door again. In her other hand was her infamous, slightly dented frying pan. Trunks gulped. Oh, hello there, Trunks. Chi-Chi blinked down at the little boy. I guess if you're here, that means Goten's back as well. She stalked into the brief's home, looking around for her little Goten. Behind her, Goku and Gohan shrugged at Trunks apologetically as they followed the female San inside. Goten, if you know what's good for you, you'll come out right now. Believe me, young man, you couldn't possibly get into any worse trouble than you're already in. Trunks could have sworn he felt the house shake down to its foundation from the sheer volume of the black-haired woman's voice. Oh boy, I almost wish I was in hell with Goten, instead of here. Well, might as well get this over with. Goten, my friend, I have a strong feeling I'm about to join you up there. Chi-Chi-san? Goten's not here, the doomed chibi hurriedly stated, the words tumbling out on their own. He and I gathered the Dragon Balls, and he wished he could meet his grandpa. That's Goku-san's dad, not the Ox King. And he didn't say where he wanted to meet him, so now he's in hell. Silence reigned for about 1 second before, my baby is where? Goten was bored. He wished Trunks was with him so he could have someone to talk to. Trunks wished he was with Goten too, but Goten didn't know that. Either night lasted longer on Vegeta-sei than it did on Check-U, or Bardock was a late sleeper. Either way, Goten was wide awake in his grandfather's apartment while said relative slept like a log. So, to pass the time, he decided to explore his new, albeit temporary if he had anything to say about it, home. The quarters consisted of one bedroom, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a closet where Bardock kept clothes and armor. That was it. He and Bardock had shared the single bed, which was, fortunately, large enough to accommodate the both of them. And at least the bathroom had a tub and shower. Goten had heard that some societies used communal baths, and while he wasn't body shy in the least, he didn't really feel like being around a lot of people he didn't know while he was taking a bath, especially since he was supposed to pretend he was someone else, namely his dad. My name is Kakarot. My name is Kakarot, he said to himself quietly, over and over, thus to get used to this now so he didn't risk slipping up in front of someone else. Currently, he was poking around in the kitchen, mentally comparing it to the one his mother used at home. One table and 2 chairs sat in the middle of the room. Obviously, Bardock wasn't used to having a lot of company over. A drawer that had a few eating utensils. A cupboard with 10 glasses, 10 plates, 10 bowls, and a few other odds and ends. A rather large refrigerator took up most of one wall, a trash can in the corner. A sink with a few more dishes was set into the opposite wall. Under the sink there was a larger cupboard where Bardock stored his pots and pans. All in all, Goten concluded, a fairly typical kitchen. The rest of the house was depressingly empty. The little chibi supposed that was the case with most warriors like Bardock, though he couldn't be certain. Vegeta certainly hadn't been one to collect knickknacks. Maybe there was something else under the sink with the pans. Only one way to find out. Bardock was having a rather pleasant dream, involving a rather large amount of food. He wasn't exactly sure what he was eating since it was a dream, but he knew that it was good and there was plenty of it. Dreams just didn't get much better than this. Bardock lifted a dream steak or something to his mouth, about to take a bite. In reality, his limbs were splayed across the bed, his head tilted to one side, and a thin line of drool trickled from the corner of his mouth, which was smiling in bliss. The dream was almost vivid enough to taste. Crash, clatter, clang. The noise scared Bardock out of the dream, a rush of adrenaline bringing him wide awake as he shot out of bed. Tripping over the armor he had left on the floor last night, he flew across the room and crashed into the wall headfirst. Itei! Kuso, that hurt. Bardock glared at the armor, cursing himself for not putting it away before he went to bed. Rubbing his injured head, he darted out of the room, half-dressed, to find the source of the noise that had awakened him. In the kitchen, he found Goten in a pile of pots and pans, the doors of the cupboard under the sink open. The demi-Saiyan grinned sheepishly up at his grandpa. Oops. Sorry. Slumping into one of the two available chairs, Bardock stared at Goten as the boy tried to put the pots and pans back under the sink. Every clatter and clang the kid made reverberated within Bardock's skull. It's a good thing, Bardock mused silently, that I didn't have that stiff drink I wanted last night. No need for a hangover made worse by the noise my grandson is making. Grandson. Poor Kakarot. If he has to put up with this on an everyday basis, he has my sympathies. Since he was already awake, Bardock decided he might as well get breakfast started. He wasn't exactly much of a cook, but he at least knew enough to keep from starving or poisoning himself. Fingering the still sore lump on his head, he set out some bread, fruit, a bowl of raw meat, a pitcher of juice, and some kind of soft grain. Saiyan-sized proportions, of course, and enough to feed the both of them. He didn't know what most of it was, but he didn't really care. Food was food. Come on, Kakarot, he said. Gotta get used to calling him that. Eat some breakfast. The chibi all too willingly complied, hastily shoving the last pot into the depths of the cupboard it had come from. Manners flew out the window as both Saiyajin began to stuff their faces with wild abandon. Manners held little meaning to the warrior race. Goten paused in his gorging when he saw the bowl of meat. A look of disgust crossed his face. You eat that raw? In answer, the older Saiyan reached over, grabbed a hunk of the bloody flesh, and popped it into his mouth. What's wrong with raw? Translation, what's wrong with raw? Katsun always cooks meat. Goten made a face as his grandfather swallowed. You're on Vegeta-sei, kid. Saiyajin eat their meat raw, which means you will too, while you're here. Try it. It's good. Bardock proffered the bowl of meat to his grandson. The Demaji Saiyan only wrinkled his nose and pulled away. Bardock sighed in frustration, feeling yet another headache coming. Look, son, he said, pulling his new father rank in an attempt to get the boy to listen to him. While you live with me, you're going to have to get used to doing things differently, and you'll have to learn to obey me as if I was your father. Remember? Goten nodded reluctantly. So, as your father, I'm telling you to eat that meat like any other Saiyajin would. Now, the sternness in the older Saiyan's voice left no doubt that he would shove the stuff down Goten's throat if necessary. Goten picked up a piece of meat and slowly brought it to his mouth. Just think of it as sushi or something. Sushi's raw fish. So this can't be that bad, right? He quickly chewed and swallowed. Surprisingly, his grandpa was right. It was good, if a little messy, but since Goten had never been one to care about cleanliness, that wasn't much of a problem for him. He reached for another piece of meat. Nodding in satisfaction, Bardock returned to his own meal. After the two finished eating and had unceremoniously dumped the dishes in the sink to be washed later, Bardock stood up and said, I'm going to get dressed. Then we can go out and find something a little more appropriate for you to wear. He eyed the soiled orange gear that Goten been wearing since he'd wished himself into the past. It wasn't really orange anymore. Mud, moss, grass stains, and food covered the stained material to the point that its original color was difficult to guess. They also covered the boy underneath, Bardock noticed. But before we can go out, you need to take a bath. Most Saiyos didn't much care about hygiene, but there was no need for his son to look like he'd just crawled through a forest and then landed in a bowl of stew face first, which might not be far from the truth. Okay, Dad. Goten happily agreed. Bardock left Goten to his own devices so he could shower and dress himself. A nice hot shower would feel pretty good right about now. He tossed a towel into the corner of the bathroom and proceeded to remove the rest of his clothing before stepping into the shower. The steaming liquid running down his face and his broad, muscled shoulders seemed to help relieve the tension headache that had been forming ever since he'd first had the vision of Frieza destroying Vegeta-sei. Bardock smirked. Tough luck, Frieza. You got beaten by a mere monkey and a child, no less. Huh? I sure am glad that vision didn't turn out to be true. Goten was pondering what to do while Bardock cleaned up when someone knocked on the door to the apartment. The chibi hesitated, looking in the direction of the bathroom. His father hadn't said whether or not he should answer the door if someone knocked. Come on, Bardock, it's me, Reisu. A muffled voice called from the other side of the door, followed by another period of pounding on the door. A.N. Reisu is pronounced Reisu. Well, Coxon always said it was rude to keep a guest waiting at the door, and since Bardock was busy, it was up to him to greet whoever this rice person was, brushing off some of the food that stuck to his geech in a futile attempt to make himself presentable. Goten ambled over to the door and opened it by pressing a button on the side. The door swushed open to reveal a tall man, though he wasn't as tall as Bardock. His skin was deeply tanned and scarred from many battles, and his hair was spiky, shoulder-length stuff that made his head look like the back of a hedgehog. The comparison brought a smile to Goten's face. The Saiyan, Reisu, fixed his surprised black eyes on the younger Saiyan. Huh? Who the hell are you? And where's Bardock? I'm Kakarot, the kid said cheerily. Bardock's my dad. He's in the shower. Rosier frowned and took another look at the boy, noting his dirty gi, his height, and, most importantly, his strong resemblance to Bardock. When did one of Bardock's kids start living with him? Last I heard, he was living alone and ranting to anyone who would listen that Frieza was going to destroy the planet. Goten blinked. Well, I just got here yesterday. The kid placed one hand behind his head and grinned. We're gonna go shopping after I take a bath. Before Rosier could ponder on the way the conversation was going, Bardock emerged from the bathroom, a towel wrapped around his waist, which his tail held up by curling around it. His hair dripped water all over the floor as he padded barefoot towards the bedroom. He stopped when he noticed the other Saiyan standing in the door, talking to Goten. Huh? Rosier? What are you doing here? The other Saiyajin gave one last look at the Bardock look-alike before devoting his whole attention to Bardock himself. I just wanted to know how the hell you knew Frieza was going to destroy Vegeta-sei, and what happened up there. Where's Frieza now? Rosie leaned against the doorframe casually, brushing an invisible speck of dirt from his spotless Saiyan armor. Banner brisked a glance at Goten, frowning. How was he going to explain this one? Well, as to how I knew what that bastard had planned, it's because of that last mission I was on. The one to Kanasase. Some alien there cursed me with foreseeing the fate of my world, and not being able to do anything about it. I was pretty freaked out myself when I realized the Bakiaro wasn't kidding around, and Frieza? Oh boy, what do I say? I can't very well tell him the truth. I don't know, he lied smoothly. The death ball was bounced back by something and it hit Frieza. My guess is he's in hell now, cursing the day he ever laid eyes on this planet. Good, claim ignorance, and maybe you can get out of this one without telling him what really happened. Rosier scowled, not satisfied with the answer. Something bounced back Frieza's attack. Why do I find that hard to believe? He asked in a sarcasm-laden voice. Well, how else would you explain how Frieza's own attack killed him? Baka? Bardock glared. Rosier wasn't exactly a friend, more of a friendly acquaintance, and Bardock didn't take kindly to being interrogated like this, although it was to be expected, given that he had known of the impending betrayal by Frieza, and had been the only one to survive the actual assault on Frieza's troops. Just because I was there doesn't mean I know everything, which was true in a sense. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to tend to my son. Bardock took hold of his son's shoulders and guided him away from the door. A jab at the door's button caused it to shut in the other Saiyajin's annoyed face. Bardock didn't care. Rezu could go to hell as far as he was concerned. In the tub now. The older man's face softened as he looked at his grandson. I suppose I should be grateful he didn't open that mouth of his and try to help me explain what happened. He plugged the tub's drain and allowed the steaming water to fill it while Goten stripped. You let my baby wish himself to hell? Chi-Chi screamed incredulously. It took both Goku and Gohan to restrain her from bashing Trunks with her frying pan. She was furious. How could you do such a thing, Trunks? Ah, Chachi, ease up on the little guy, Goku pleaded with his wife. He couldn't have known what would happen. Besides, Gohan chipped in, Goten's the one who made the wish, not Trunks. It's not his fault. I don't care. All I know is that my son is in hell and no one's doing anything about it. Chi-Chi, relax, Bulma said soothingly, placing one hand on her friend's shoulders. I have an idea. Goku, why don't you go to hell and look for Goten? You know, use that teleportation trick of yours. The blue-haired woman chuckled suddenly. If Goten's in hell, he's probably wreaking havoc somewhere. If I know him, someone will know where he is. And if that doesn't work, you can always just look for a bunch of Saiyajin. They'd probably know where your dad is. Goku, wherever he is, Goten will probably be nearby. Chi-Chi whipped around suddenly and conked Goku's head with her frying pan. Well, what are you waiting for? Go to hell, Son Goku, or I'm not going to feed you for a week. The mighty Saiyan panicked at a fate worse than death. No need to threaten, Chi-Chi. I'll go right now. He placed 2 fingers on his forehead, a look of concentration on his face. Wait, young Trunks cried. Goku paused and looked at the little demi-Saiyan. I want to go too. Please take me with you, Goku-san. Goten's my friend. If anything happened to him, The boy's voice cracked and he couldn't finish what he was saying. He blinked back tears at the thought of what his friend must be going through right now. Not on your life, Buster, Bulma snapped. If both you and Goten get together in hell, I have no doubt that all hell will break loose. Figuratively and literally. You're staying right here. But Mom, no buts. I mean it, Trunks. I don't want to hear another word out of you about you going to hell with Goku. Before Trunks could even open his mouth to protest yet again, Goku disappeared. Chi-Chi tucked her frying pan under one arm with a satisfied smirk on her face. She had complete faith in her husband. He would come home with her youngest son, safe and sound. She just knew it. I'm going home now, Bulma. When my Goku gets back with Goten, they're both probably going to be hungry. Come on, Goku. We need to go home. Hanto, Goten's not in hell or heaven. Goku scratched his head in puzzlement. But if he's not alive and he's not dead, where is he? Keiyo-sama. The short, blue, fish-faced god of the North Quadrant of the galaxy glared at his one-time student. How should I know? He yelled. I keep telling you, he just disappeared. Like he doesn't exist anymore. There 1 minute, gone the next. Goku looked thoughtful, which was a very odd expression to see on the normally clueless face. The Saiyan tended to wear. It wasn't that he actually was stupid. It was just that he preferred to take life as it is without worrying about things he couldn't help. Goten had wished to meet his grandfather, a person not even Goku knew, and that wish had caused him to disappear. But where? Roar. All thoughts, serious or otherwise, disappeared from the powerful man's mind as he clutched his stomach. Oh man, I'm starving. Say, King Kai, do you think Chi-Chi will feed me, even if I don't have Goten when I go home? Goku asked pathetically. The life of his son is at stake, and the guy can't think about anything other than his stomach. Honestly, Goku, sometimes your innocence astounds me. You're like an overgrown child, in a sense. The K's eyes widened as he realized what he'd just said. Get it? Innocence? Innocent. He broke down in a fit of giggling at his own joke, rolling on the ground while Goku stared at the creature who was one of the best martial arts masters of all time. A huge sweat drop rolled down the back of his head. Yeah, I guess I'll be going now. Thanks for your time, Kyak-sama. He waved as he placed 2 fingers on his forehead and vanished once again, and reappeared in Capsule Corporation where Bulma was watching television. Goku quickly told her about his discovery that Goten didn't appear to be anywhere. Maybe she could figure out what happened. She was, after all, a genius, and that would leave Goku's brain free to concentrate on one of the more important aspects of life without feeling guilty. I wonder what Chi-Chi made for lunch. Unbeknownst to Bulma or Goku, Trunks had come downstairs in search of lunch, passing by the room his mother was in just as Goku popped into existence, and so he had heard every word they had said. I wish that I could meet my dad's dad. That was what Goten had said, and now Goten was gone, vanished from reality. If what Goku said was true, vanished from reality, the Chibi Saiyan gasped involuntarily as a sudden thought struck him. What if Goten's wish didn't send him to where his grandpa is now, but where his grandpa used to be. That would mean that Goten wasn't anywhere to be found, because he was in the past. Trunks' back straightened with determination. He needed to get to Goten. His friend really didn't stand a chance by himself, lost in the past, who knows where, and there was only one way he was going to be able to reach Goten anytime soon. The 9-year-old boy ran back to his room. He had a plan, and he'd be damned if he let anyone keep him from helping his friend. Kersplash! Water splashed everywhere as Goten leapt into the bathtub. He lathered soap all over his body, playing with the bubbles the suds made, his face positively glowing. Bardock reached down and picked up the soiled degay the boy had left on the floor. He wrinkled his nose at the odor it gave off and debated whether or not to just throw it into the garbage. Something fell out of a pocket somewhere within the clothing, landing on the floor with a faint clatter. The Saiyan leaned over and picked it up, curious. "What's this?" He held up the circular green and silver device. Goten looked over at what Bardock was holding. That's the Dragon Radar. Me and Trunks used it to find the Dragon Balls. You just press that button and they show up on the green screen thingy, if they're nearby. Bardock clicked the little button on the side of the radar. Not surprisingly, the screen remained blank. "We're probably too far away from Earth to pick up any signals," he sighed, then looked thoughtfully at the gadget in his hand. "But maybe if we go to Earth, we could find the Dragon Balls there and wish you back to where you're supposed to be." So far, it was the best plan he'd come up with yet for how to return his grandson to the future. Still wearing nothing but a towel, Bardock dropped the gi back on the floor and left the bathroom. He'd wash it in the remainder of Goten's bathwater once the kid was done getting cleaned up, since the warrior didn't exactly have anything that would fit Goten and he'd need to wear something when they went shopping. Dropping the radar on the bed, he rummaged through his closet for something casual, which meant something that didn't look like he was ready to tear the arms off anyone who wasn't careful. He finally settled for a pair of black, loose-fitting pants and an aquamarine shirt that would allow him freedom of movement. That done, he checked in on Goten again. The Chibi Saiyan had managed to remove most of the grime from his body and didn't appear to be improving anymore, so he ordered the kid out of the bath, handing him a dry towel. Now for the gear. Bardock plucked the garment up and tossed it into the soapy bathwater, half-heartedly shaking it to loosen the debris that clung to the cloth. There was no way in hell the thing would ever be completely clean, and Bardock didn't particularly feel like trying to return it to its best state. He rinsed it and wrung out the water. It was better than it had been before, but that wasn't saying much. Still, it would have to do. Goten briskly rubbed his hair with a towel to remove excess water, then put the once orange gi on, still wet, which was more than a little uncomfortable. "Can we go shopping now, Tucson?" "Sure, kid," Bardock smiled faintly. Goten's cheerful disposition was beginning to rub off on him a little. Being around the boy made Bardock realize what he'd missed out on when he'd sent his son Kakarot off to some backwater world instead of raising him himself. It was something Bardock was surprised to find himself regretting, even if it was only a little bit. "Let's get going." Perfect. Everyone was asleep, even his father. No one would know he was gone until morning. If he suppressed his ki, not even Goku would be able to find him. Trunks snuck into the spaceship, closing the hatch behind him. He had several changes of clothes, his toothbrush, a pocket case full of hoi poi capsules, which contained all the food he figured he'd need for the trip, and a few other handy gadgets, like a second Dragon Radar, and even a couple of senzu beans he'd stashed away in case of an emergency. He really didn't know what he was getting himself into, after all, and it wouldn't hurt to be prepared. He'd left a note behind for his parents to find in the morning, after he was gone. It told them he loved them, but that he had to go find Goten and didn't know when he'd be back. All true, he had purposefully left out his intended destination. No need to have them follow him. Now it was off to Namek to collect the Namekian Dragon Balls. Somewhere out in space. Vegeta frowned as he finished reading the messages on his ship's computer console. Nandi Kuso. "My father is dead? Freysa? Gone? What the hell is going on here?" "Nappa," he said, via the intership communication system. "Set a course back to Vegeta-sei." "Hi, Vegeta-G." Two pods suddenly veered off their original course. The inhabitants of the world below saw only two comets swerve in an odd manner and slowly vanish into the night. The creatures that lived on that world would never know that they had just escaped extinction, for the planet had been scheduled to be cleared by the Planet Trade, which was run by the now-deceased Lord Frieza. Until today, Bardock had not had any idea that someone could enjoy buying clothing as much as his grandson apparently did. The kid ran back and forth through the store, Amusing the shopkeeper and drawing annoyed looks from some of the shoppers, Goten had been absolutely thrilled when Bardock had told him that he could pick out the colors of the shirts, pants, and gi-like clothes that made up the casual wear of the everyday Saiyajin. When Bardock had asked him about his enthusiasm, the Demi-Saiyan had explained that usually his mom picked out his clothing for him, not giving him any choice in the matter. Apparently, according to this Chi-Chi, Goten's taste in color was a little too bright. Fortunately for Bardock, there were no bright clothes in this store. At least, not on the order that Goten was describing. Neon orange with yellow and green flowers. Ouch! In the end, Itkin picked out 2 shirts, one a muted sea green, the other a soft sky blue. 2 pairs of pants, one black, the other a sandy tan color, and 2 gis, one sea green, the other dark blue. They hadn't had anything in the orange that Goten favored, to his disappointment. Still, the fact that he now had a shirt and a gi that matched his father's color of preference, sea green, more than made up for this failure. In addition to the other clothing, Goten now had 2 new pairs of CN boots. The orange gi he'd been wearing had been discarded in favor of the brand new green one. All in all, Goten was one happy kid. Goten insisted on carrying his new possessions back to the apartment himself. Bardock grinned. That had to be the Saiyajin blood in Goten's veins. His grandson obviously didn't want to be thought of as too small and weak to handle it. Speaking of Saiyan blood, making sure Goten wasn't looking in his direction, Bardock surreptitiously slipped a scouter out of his pocket. Time to test just how strong the kid was. Not here, though. If he asked Goten to show him his power here, every active scouter in the vicinity would be able to read it. What he could do right now was see what reading his grandson had when he was supposedly tamping it down, then compare it to his actual power level when he got the chance to see it. How someone could hide their ki was beyond the Bardock. He'd never heard of anyone with such an ability, except for changelings who gained power during a transformation. However, the boy seemed confident that it could be done. Bardock slipped the machine over his ear, adjusting the eyepiece, then looked at Goten and depressed a button. Beep, 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 beep. The scouter finally came to a stop after several seconds of beeping in Bardock's ear. Masaka, no normal child could have so much power at that age. 10-15, unbelievable. Kakarot, Goten stopped and turned his head towards Bardock. Nani, Tusan. Your power level is too high. If anyone read it right now and connected it with you, an 8-year-old kid, you'd attract more attention than a herd of wild Chatanols running through the streets. Oops. Sorry, Daddy. Much to Bardock's surprise, even though he was expecting it, the numbers on his scouter started to slide downward, finally resting at 55. The older Saiyan let out a shaky breath. So it was true. Goten was suppressing his power, and if he had thought he was keeping it low enough when it was at 10-15, Bardock was almost frightened to think of what the Chibi Saiyan's power must be when he was at full. The rest of the trip back to Bardock's home was quiet, each Saiyan keeping his thoughts to himself. Goten's thoughts were blissfully free of anything negative. The kid couldn't have been happier. Well, that is, unless Trunks showed up, in which case he'd be even happier. He really missed Trunks. But the Chibi wasn't going to let anything get him down right now. He had new clothes, a full stomach, and he was spending time with the grandfather he had never known. Life was great. Bardock, on the other hand, was feeling somewhat depressed. With all the excitement of the past 2 days, the loss of his team had been shoved to the back of his mind, to be dealt with when he wasn't occupied with anything else. The walk home was just such a time. Totopo, Panbukin, Celipa, they had been more than just teammates, really. Bardock wouldn't admit it to anyone else, but they had been friends, and now they were gone, murdered by Frieza's lackeys. Clenching his fists, Bardock angrily shoved his emotions back. If he let himself dwell on them, he knew that he'd only end up trying to find a way to get himself drunk. He had a grandchild to take care of, and couldn't afford the luxury of drowning his emotions and memories in his cup. Looking at Goten, Bardock realized his team had already been avenged. Frieza had sent his creatures to kill Bardock's team, and now Frieza was dead, killed by the hand of a child who was, in a sense, Bardock's own flesh and blood. A smile crept over the warrior's face as the two passed through the door into Bardock's home. Whatever else Goten might be, he was a great influence on Bardock's spirits. Bardock hadn't really had anyone who could prevent him from getting depressed, merely by being present since his wife had died. No, I will not get into that. I will not dwell on the past. I will spend time with my grandson and be happy. I can deal with all the emotional crap after I get Goten back where he belongs. Bardock closed the door behind him with a sigh. Once Goten was gone, he didn't know what he would do with himself or his memories. Kuso, no one knows what happened to Frieza. All those idiots can tell me is that he attacked Vegeta-sei, then disappeared without a trace. Rumors of one survivor, but no one seems to know who he is. When I get back to the palace, there had better be some answers, or someone will die. The 10-year-old prince scowled into the endless depths of space. Technically he was king, with his father dead, but Vegeta would not accept the title until he was officially crowned. Nor would anyone call him king until the day of the ceremony. On Vegeta-sei, heirs sometimes didn't live long enough to inherit that which was theirs. The little prince considered himself lucky that the planet he'd been assigned to was relatively close to his home world. In just a few short, or long, depending on your point of view, hours, he would be able to breathe the air of the planet that he'd been born on. Until then, though, he was stuck in this cramped little ship with barely enough room to raise his arms and only his loyal bodyguard, Nappa, for company. Somewhere out in space, in another time, Trunks heaved a sigh as he gazed at the stars through his viewport. He was bored, he had no one to talk to, no one to play pranks on, no one to yell at him, no one to train with. He missed Goten terribly. Once again, the young seer looked over his supplies, making sure he had everything he'd need for when he got to Namek, and later when he was in the past. He already knew he was as ready as he was going to get, but it was something to do if Trunks wanted to keep his sanity. Keeping himself busy was important. Vegeta stormed away from the landing pad, ignoring the sycophant landing crew that scurried around him, cowering in fear of the Saiyajin no Oji, as well they should. The Forzio prince was in a foul temper. Frieza had murdered his father. Frieza was dead, and no one knew who had killed him, thus making it impossible for Frieza to ever realize his dream of crushing the tyrannical bastard himself. And his stupid Bakayaro hadn't even bothered to blow Frieza's ship, along with all his lackeys, to hell, along with the planet trade leader himself. Now the ship containing Zarbon, the Doria, and the Jinyu Force. Vegeta paused here to utter several colorful and graphically descriptive obscenities, had disappeared, probably to report to that bastard of an Asiu Jin that Frieza had called father. Great. Just great. Now instead of Frieza blowing up the world, his father would do the dirty deed instead, claiming vengeance as his motive, no doubt. Bah. As if Cold actually cared about his son. Stalking up to the first person he saw who looked like they might have some authority, the little prince grabbed the other's tunic and roughly pulled him down so he could glare the man in the eye. I want to know who killed that bastard Frieza, and I want to know now, he roared, his eyes promising a very painful death if he didn't get what he wanted. The hapless spaceport manager gulped, his eyes wide in terror. Sure, Vegeta was only 10 years old, but even at such a young age, he was more powerful than most Saiyans could ever hope to be. Most Saiyans included the manager, and besides, this was the prince. If the prince of all Saiyans ordered his death, the manager had no doubt that every being on the landing pad would jump up and obediently attack him. Unfortunately for the manager, he had no clue who had killed Frieza. He could only hope that his prince would kill him quickly. Indeed, it appeared that Chibi Vegeta was about to angrily deliver a killing blow to the wretched being who dared remain silent. That is until someone spoke up. Wait, Your Highness. Vegeta glared in fury at the person who spoke. Who are you? He barked. How dare you interrupt the Sachan, no OG. Speak, before I blast you to the next dimension. My prince, my name is Risu, and I think I know someone who can tell you how Frieza died. Collapsing on the bed, Bart stared at the ceiling as Goten put his new clothing in the closet. It was nearly noon, as the Saiyajin's stomach was pointedly reminding him that shopping trip had taken longer than he'd expected. Not that he minded, really. Bardock had enjoyed the time spent with the grandson he wasn't supposed to have for another few decades. Maybe he was just getting soft. He didn't care. Grandpa? Bardock turned his head to look at Goten. The boy had climbed on the bed and was sitting cross-legged at Bardock's side. Yeah, what is it, kid? The Saiyan warrior rolled onto his side, propping himself up with an elbow. There was a note in Goten's voice that Bardock hadn't heard before. I miss my dad, the child said sadly, his eyes meeting his grandfather's. Bardock was startled. To see the faint signs of tears forming in the boy's eyes, Bardock raised an eyebrow. I guess it's finally dawned on him that he might never see his dad again if we can't find a way to get him home. Poor kid. To hell with this cold, emotionless warrior crap. No one's watching anyway. With that thought in mind, the warrior did something that was the very opposite of the hardened soldier image he had worn for the world to see for so many years. Bardock reached out and drew Goten into his arms, giving him a good, strong hug. No words, no fluff, no sobs or anything else. Just a hug. A hug that lasted for several minutes before Bardock released his grandson, placing his hands on the young boy's shoulders and looking him directly in the eye. The tears were gone, but Goten wasn't smiling. For some reason, that made Bardock's heart ache. He'd gotten so used to seeing the kid with a cheerful smile and a ready laugh that it just seemed wrong for him to look sad. "We'll find a way to get you home to your father, Goten," Bardock said, smiling. What he hoped was a reassuring smile. "But until then, you're stuck with me. I hope that's okay with you." Goten nodded half-heartedly, quirking his lips into a semblance of a smile. "Come on," Bardock mock-scolded. "You can do better than that." A twinkle lit the eyes of the older Saiyajin, and a genuine grin spread across his face as he started tickling Goten's ribs. "Maybe you just need some help getting that smile back on your face." Goten couldn't help but laugh now as his grandfather attacked his sides with glee. Truly, nothing could keep this little demi-Saiyan down for long. He tackled Bardock and tickled him back, the two of them rolling on the bed and laughing wildly. Bardock had never felt so alive before. Calmly, it felt good to laugh. Never in all the battles he'd fought and won had he ever experienced a feeling such as this. This was what life must truly be about. This feeling of laughter and joy, happiness and love that no victory or conquest could ever bring. Bam, bam, bam. Later, Bardock would swear that he must have jumped at least 5 feet in the air. He and Goten landed on the floor in a tangle of limbs and bed sheets, causing yet another bout of laughter. They quickly extricated themselves from the mess and headed for the door. Bardock in the lead, he thumbed the button by the door that opened it. It slid aside to reveal 2 large, muscle-bound saints wearing the armor that only guards wore. The royal crest was imprinted on the right breastplate. That wiped the smile off Bardock's face, and he eyed the two warily. Before he had a chance to speak, one of the guards brusquely announced, "Prince Vegeta commands that you present yourself to him at once." Bardock opened his mouth to protest, but was cut off by the other man. "Come as you are, the prince does not like to be kept waiting," he growled. This time, Bardock spoke quickly enough that he managed to say something before being interrupted again. "But, my son?" He gestured at Goten, who stood uncertainly behind him. Confusion painted clearly on his face for all to see. He looked like Bardock felt. The first guard scowled and bared his teeth in a grimace. "Bring him if you must, but we are leaving now." One did not ignore the royal guards and expect to live a long life. Bardock hastily scooped Goten up in his arms so that he wouldn't be left behind. He had no clue what was going on or why the prince wanted to see him, but he couldn't leave Goten behind. For one thing, who knew what kind of mischief the Chibi Saiyan would get into while he was gone? For another thing, he had no clue how long he would be gone, or even if he would come back. It wasn't every day one got called before the Prince of all Saiyans. One guard in front, the other behind, the odd group headed towards the palace. Said Prince of all Saiyans was pacing back and forth in the throne room, his tail lashing behind him angrily. "Where are they? Just how long does it take to drag a lowly third-class Saiyan here?" The child prince turned on a guard, his eyes flaming dangerously. He didn't know whether he was going to kill the man just for the hell of it, or if he was going to command the guard to go and find out what was taking so damn long. He never found out because at that moment, the original 2 guards that Vegeta had sent stepped into the room. A young man who looked to be in his 20s or 30s between them, dressed in a sea-green shirt and black pants. The man was carrying a child of perhaps 7 or 8 years in age, wearing a matching sea-green gi, who had to be related to him somehow. No way in hell was that hair a coincidence. "Took your damn time, didn't you?" Vegeta snarled, facing them. The trio knelt, almost in unison, the 2 guards with practice and ease. The man somewhat awkwardly, considering he was still holding the boy. The prince stalked forward until he was only a foot from the man who had to be the third-class warrior. Risu had told him about. "You are Bardock. What a pathetic excuse for a Saiyajin warrior. How in Kami's name did you survive against Frieza?" Vegeta mocked scathingly. To his credit, Bardock didn't even flinch. Goten, however, drew his eyebrows together in a scowl and slid out of Bardock's grasp. He folded his arms and scowled at Vegeta, staring him directly in the face. A collective gasp echoed from the walls of the spacious throne room. No one looked Vegeta Yuji in the eyes. No one stood up to him. No one dared to not bow. No one. As if to prove that this wasn't the worst scandal that would happen that day, Goten opened his mouth and dared to speak without being spoken to. Hell, he spoke without even being introduced. You take that back, he demanded, clenching his fists angrily. He was fighting a losing battle with his ki, trying to keep it low as it fought to rise up in preparation for offense or defense. The silence that ensued was almost deafening. Anyone who looked at Vegeta would have noticed that the 10-year-old boy had a vein on his forehead that stood out against his otherwise perfect face, throbbing in time with his increasing heartbeat. A corner of his eye twitched uncontrollably as he debated whether to order someone to kill the upstart bastard son of a third-class warrior or kill the Gaki himself. "Who are you?" the prince growled, his own fists clenched tight enough to draw blood from the palms of his hands. "I am Jide Kakarot," Goten shot back, mentally berating himself for nearly slipping up. "And I'm his son." He lifted his chin and pointed at Bardock, pride written on his face for all to see. Vegeta smirked. He leaned over and plucked a scouter from one of the guards' faces, settling it onto his ear and pressing a button. When the thing stopped making noise, the prince raised an eyebrow. 720. Impressive. For a third-class Gaki, he sneered. "Tell me, Kakarot, son of Bardock, are you ready to meet your ancestors? I hope you are, because I'm about to send you to greet them." He threw a lightning-fast punch, too fast for the eye to follow, aimed directly between this Kakarot's eyes. With all of the power the prince could muster backing it up, it would be a killing blow. He was angry. Damn it, had been angry for the past several hours, and this brat had just made himself a target for the Saiyajin no Oge's pent-up frustration and wrath. With an ease and grace that almost seemed to mock the punch Vegeta had just thrown, Goten raised one hand and caught the punch before it landed. Vegeta was so surprised that he failed to even notice the rapidly increasing numbers on his scouter. As if to protest being ignored, the device suddenly exploded. Unable to cope with the surging energy coming from the boy, every single active scouter in the room simultaneously shattered, proving that this was no coincidence. "You really don't want to get in a fight with me, Vegeta," Goten stated, his voice dangerously calm, like the calm before a storm. His aura was now visible to the naked eye, blazing blue, lighting everything in the room with a stark brightness that made the shadows look harsh in contrast. One of the guards had been paying attention to the numbers on his scouter, until it had blown up in his face and was now trembling like a leaf caught in a tornado. "His power," he whispered hoarsely. "Masaka, my scouter read 50,000 before it exploded. And it was still rising," he added silently. Bardock was still kneeling, watching in horror as the scene played itself out. When he'd taken Goten with him, he had been concerned for his grandson's safety. He hadn't even thought of the possibility that perhaps it wasn't Goten's safety he should have been worried about. 50,000 before the scouters overloaded? Dear Kami, what is he? Meanwhile, Chibi Vegeta was still staring at his own hand, trapped in the grip of Goten's hand. Slowly, like an iron drawn to a magnet, the prince's gaze traveled up to meet Goten's coal-black eyes. He suddenly felt the urge to run, to find the deepest, darkest hole and crawl into it. But no, he was the Saiyajin no Oji. He would not bolt like a coward. He might be only 10 years old, but he was of royal blood and thus not supposed to be susceptible to fear. "You just keep telling yourself that," a sarcastic voice in the prince's mind sneered. "Shut up!" The prince snarled back silently. "You're the one who killed Frieza, aren't you?" It was not a question. He didn't know how it was possible that a child could have so much power. He didn't know how this child could have possibly killed Frieza, even with a power level of over 50,000. But it had to be him. No one on the entire planet could have defeated the alien tyrant because no one had anywhere close to the power that Frieza possessed. Except, perhaps, this Gaki. The statement caught Goten off guard. He grinned sheepishly, placing one hand behind his head in embarrassment. "Well, actually, Frieza killed himself, like water through a sieve." Goten's aura vanished as he powered down. He let go of Vegeta's hand. The Chibi Prince automatically took a step back, rubbing his fist with his other hand. "Huh?" He blinked. His blank face must have looked utterly confused. That was how he felt, and Frankly, he didn't think he was doing a very successful job at hiding his emotions right now. Seeing this look, Goten clarified, I only bounced his big ball back at him. Frieza killed himself because it was his attack that killed him. See, I wasn't really meaning to kill him, I just kinda got scared and reacted out of instinct. Nandakuso, Frieza was killed by accident? Every person in the room openly stared at Goten, who just grinned back. Somewhere in space, in another time. Yippee! I'm here, I'm finally here! Trunks did a little victory dance as he stared out the viewport at the large, green planet that was rapidly becoming even bigger as the spaceship descended. Bless you, Mom, and Grandpa, for improving the technology of this bucket of bolts. It only took a week to get here instead of 1 or 2 months. Look out, Namek, 'cause here I come. For what seemed like an eternity, Trunks waited by the hatch until he felt the ship settle onto the ground. It was all he could do to restrain himself from tearing the door off its hinges. He didn't know if he'd need the spaceship intact or not, so it was better to be safe than sorry. At last, the movement of the ship ceased, and the little green light next to the door blinked on, indicating it was safe to open the hatch now. Trunks hit the button next to the door to open it, dashing out before it had even completely slid to the side. Dragon radar in one hand and a pack of supplies on his back, the purple-haired Demi-Saiyan burst into flight. A white aura surrounded him, humming in his ears, as he clicked the button on the radar to locate the first Dragon Ball. What luck! Trunks mentally cheered as the radar blipped the Dragon Ball's location. There's a Dragon Ball, only a short distance away. Trunks dove down and started searching through a clump of bushes or scrubby trees until he came up with the beach ball-sized Dragon Ball. The orange-red sphere was nearly as large as Trunks' head and had 2 little red stars floating within. As he picked the ball up, the chibi realized he'd come across his first dilemma. How am I going to carry all the Dragon Balls? He thought out loud. 1 Dragon Ball was fine, but 7. This would require some thought, so Trunks sat down cross-legged. Next to the 2-star Dragon Ball, his brow furrowed in concentration. The tip of his tail twitched back and forth rhythmically in time to the pace of his mind. I could just bring each Dragon Ball back to my ship when I find it, he mused silently. But I'd really rather not leave them unattended or grouped together like that in case someone else finds them. Maybe I could rig some kind of net to carry them in. No, that's no good. I don't have anything that would work as a net big enough for 7 of these balls. Trunks' train of thought was interrupted, as his stomach informed him that thinking on an empty stomach was generally not a good idea, nor was it very conducive to coming up with solutions to one's problems. Well, starving never did anyone any good, so I might as well have some breakfast. He pulled out one of the capsules that he'd packed with food, depressed the button on the top, and gently tossed it away. Bomb! In a puff of smoke, a huge mountain of food appeared, which the boy attacked eagerly, ready to greatly diminish its size. Boy, was he glad he'd remembered that huge feast that had been left sitting out in the middle of nowhere, and here he'd thought Goten had wasted a wish. Trunks had put the food to good use, encapsulating all of it before it spoiled. It made good addition to the rest of the food he'd managed to pilfer from his mom's pantry, which was quite a lot. Trunks was about halfway through the mountain of food when something dawned on him. Carrying the Dragon Balls would be easy. All he had to do was use one of his empty capsules and encapsulate the Dragon Balls until he needed them. No worries about stashing them someplace, or nets, or anything. See? His stomach seemed to say. I knew that you'd find a solution once you got a full belly. The Demi-Saiyan felt no need to argue the point. He finished eating his meal, putting the leftovers back into the capsule they came out of, and then encapsulated the Dragon Ball he'd just found. Now to find the rest of the Dragon Balls. Only 1 more ball to go, and then he could make his wish. There really hadn't been much in the way of challenges during the journey. The worst that he'd had to go through was coming a little closer to a volcano than he normally preferred. Trunks guessed it was because Namek was sparsely populated and its inhabitants were peaceful farmers for the most part. It was nearly nighttime according to Earth's system of keeping time of his second day on Namek. With his speed, traveling to each Dragon Ball took very little time. He'd only stopped for food and sleep, as needed. There was no real way to tell time here, since Namek had no night. Slowing as he approached his destination, the location of the final Dragon Ball, Trunks noted with interest that it appeared to be within one of the settlements the Neps had built. He checked the radar as he descended towards the buildings. The Dragon Ball would probably be there, in that large hut. The Demi-Saisian landed lightly, ignoring the green beings who stopped what they were doing as they caught sight of him. He made a beeline to the building that he guessed housed the final Dragon Ball. Two of the Nameks, well-built and dressed in loose clothing, stood in front of the only entrance into the structure, obviously guarding whatever or whoever was within. Trunks decided he should probably be polite, so he stopped in front of them. The two looked down at the pint-sized purple-haired boy with amusement. "What is your name, kid?" one of them asked curiously. "I'm Trunks Briefs," the Saiyan answered proudly, drawing himself up to his full height, which only brought him up to a little bit above the Namek's waistline. He should probably explain what he was doing here, or he might not be let inside this building. The boy really didn't want to have to hurt anyone. He only wanted to get the final Dragon Ball so he could rejoin his friend. "I'm looking for a Dragon Ball with 7 stars in it." Surprise flickered across the visages of both Nameks, and something unspoken passed between them. "Wait here," the first one said, disappearing through the doorway of the hut. Trunks shrugged and stood patiently. While he wanted to get the last Dragon Ball as soon as possible and make his wish, he knew better than to rush things that shouldn't be rushed. He knew from his experience with Piccolo that Nameks could be tough opponents, and he had no real desire to find out how good these Nameks were. The only thing on his mind right now was making that wish. As it turned out, it only took a few minutes for the first Namek reappeared, a solemn look on his face. "The Elder will see you," Trunks briefs. That was a surprise. He didn't know exactly what he'd expected, but Trunks hadn't realized that he had managed to bring himself to the doorstep of the Elder of the Nameks. Suddenly finding himself more than a little nervous, the half-breed followed his Namek escort inside the darkened building. The 6-foot-plus green man strode down a short hall, then paused outside the entrance to another room. "The Elder is within." Trunks nodded his thanks and walked into the room hesitantly. The first thing to catch his attention was the old and large Namek within. No offense, but he was huge. Beyond his sheer size, his presence alone seemed to fill the room completely, barely leaving room for the boy to breath, or so it seemed. Fortunately, the aura that the Elder projected was a calming one, filled with wisdom gained through years of life. To one side, a younger Namek child about Trunks' own height stood in attendance. "I'm told you are searching for the 7-star Dragon Ball." The Elder's voice, kind and wise, seemed to be absorbed by the walls of the room. "May I ask why?" Cuts to the point, doesn't he? "My friend, son Goten," he's Goku's son, used the Earth's Dragon Balls to wish to meet his grandpa. I don't think he was careful enough in how he said his wish, though, because instead of bringing his grandpa to Earth, the Eternal Dragon took Goten to his grandpa. Goku looked for Goten in the afterlife, but he wasn't there either. I think he's been sent to the past before his grandpa died. The Earth's Dragon Balls won't be able to grant a wish for another year, so I came here to Namek. I need the Dragon Balls so that I can find Goten. Trunks paused in his explanation. He looked up at the Elder hopefully. "Do you have the last Dragon Ball, sir?" The Namek seemed to pause and consider his answer for a moment. "Yes, I do. Every time a wish is made upon the Dragon Balls, a search is made to bring one of the Dragon Balls to the current Elder. Thus at all times the wishes the Eternal Dragon may grant are guarded. Only by gaining the Dragon Ball the Elder possesses can a wish be made." Excitement flooded through Trunks' veins and his eyes lit up. "Please, sir. May I have the Dragon Ball? I only need 1 wish, so that'll leave 2 for your people to use. Please?" The chibi could only hope that he didn't sound too pathetic. It was a good thing his father, Vegeta, wasn't here now. He could only imagine what his father would have to say about begging for anything from the Nameks. Silence fell as the Elder considered once again. He eyed the Saiyan boy thoughtfully, then smiled. "Samuel, would you please go get the Dragon Ball for our young guest?" The young Namek at the Elder's side, Samuel, nodded and left the room for a few moments, returning with the 7th and final Dragon Ball in his arms. Samuel handed the sphere to Trunks. Trunks' heart leapt into his throat. This was it. Now he could make his wish and find his friend. Goten. He hoped Goten hadn't gotten into too much trouble, wherever or whatever he was. Bardock was wondering if things could possibly get worse. A moment's reflection brought him to the conclusion that, yes, things could get worse. At least Goten hadn't accidentally slipped up and revealed that he was from the future. Bad enough that he'd just shown that he outstripped every Saiyajin on the planet, power-wise. There was no need to let everyone know that he wasn't even really supposed to exist yet, or that none of them were supposed to exist at all. Barring Vegeta, of course. They were currently in the middle of a standoff. Vegeta refused to back down, despite being outmatched by the little demi-Saiyan because of his pride. The guards were hovering around them all nervously and wouldn't act unless given orders. Bardock was no longer kneeling. Sometime during the exchange, protocol had flown out the window, so the 30-some-odd-year-old Saiyan saw no real need to remain in the uncomfortable position. It certainly wasn't the worst scandal that had occurred that day. Might not even be the last. No one knew what they were waiting for. A wary silence had ensued after Goten's astonishing announcement that Frieza had been killed by accident. It was almost as if the world was waiting for some signal before it would start functioning again. Trunks took a deep breath. Before him were the 7 Dragon Balls of Namek, glowing faintly in the sun's light. Behind him a group of Nameks had gathered, no doubt to witness the summoning of the eternal dragon Porunga, not Shenlong. The Demi-Saiyan's heartbeat was unsteady as he looked over at Samael, the acting translator. "I'm ready," he said, proud that his voice remained steady. Nodding, Sanyo turned to the Dragon Balls and said something incomprehensible in the language of the Namets. In response to his words, the sky darkened to pitch black, and a large muscular dragon emerged from the center of the Dragon Balls. The dragon spoke in the same tongue Sanyo had used, his voice rumbling and echoing. Sanyo looked at Trunks. "What is your wish?" he asked simply. Taking another steadying breath, Trunks replied, "I wish to be where my friend Son Goten is, and I mean the Son Goten of this time in whatever time or place is, now." It was hard to be accurate with a wish that might very well span more than one timeline or reality or whatever. It was important, though, to end up where his friend Goten was. The Chibi Saiyan looked at the Chibi Namek to make sure he understood. Surprisingly, Samael nodded in utter comprehension. He turned back to Porunga and spoke a long string of Namekian sentences. The dragon's eyes flashed, and he uttered one phrase. Trunks' vision swam as everything around him changed. The throne room was suddenly filled with a bright light, and everyone present cried out and covered their eyes to keep from being blinded. When it dissipated, everyone blinked in an attempt to clear the afterimages away. There was something odd, though. Sometime during the flash of light, someone else had somehow entered the room. A boy, a very odd-looking boy with purple hair. "Goten!" a child's voice shouted, filled with sheer joy. "Trunks!" Goten shouted back, the grin on his face spreading to half the size of his head. "Oh, Cammy, no." Bardock gripped his head in his hands and groaned. "No, no, not Trunks. Please let it be someone who only looks like Trunks." Wait, he knew who Goten was. Damn it, it is Trunks. Cammy, why now? Things were already messed up enough as it is. They really don't need any help from another Demi-Saiyan from the future. Again, the Saiyan felt the strong urge to find a bar and drink himself silly. He could tell that another headache was looming over the horizon. Unaware of the stares they were receiving, the 2 little time travelers rushed forward with glee and did a strange victory dance of some sort, laughing the whole time. "Trunks, how did you get here?" Goten exclaimed, still grinning the famous sun grin, TM. "I went to Namek and used their Dragon Balls. I thought you were in hell." Goten: "Your dad went to hell to look for you, 'cause your mom was worried and I wanted to go too, but my mom wouldn't let me, and I thought that they wouldn't let me go to Namek when I realized that you had to be here instead of in hell. So I went to Namek without telling anyone, and I found the Dragon Balls, and I used them to get here." Trunks was practically babbling in his attempt to tell everything that had happened to him as quickly as possible. "And what about you? What have you been doing? How long has it been for you? Did Jai find your grandpa? What the hell is going on here?" Chibi Vegeta roared, shutting both Trunks and Goten up. "Cool!" Trunks' eyes were wide and a smile crossed his face. Not the happy-to-see-you smile he'd been wearing a moment ago. No, this one was much different. This one looked a lot like the smirk his father tended to wear. "Vegeta's here." Technically, Bardock was the most powerful adult in the room at the time. No one knew this but Bardock, of course, but somehow it still seemed to impress upon Bardock a feeling of being responsible for this whole mess. And with responsibility comes duty. It was his duty to put a stop to this before things got ugly. "Kakarot," he emphasized the name Goten had been using. "Trunks, I think maybe we should save the reunion for another time." Damn it, he really wanted to just grab the 2 boys and run. "We are, after all, in the presence of the prince. That's it. Mollify the prince's pride, and maybe he won't try to order anyone's death." If Goten was correct, Trunks was at least as powerful as his friend, if not more so. Kami, just what we need. Two super powerful dummy Saiyans. Hey, Goten, he looks like your dad. And why did he call you Kakarot? That's what— oh, what'd you do that for? Goten elbowed Trunks in the side again. That is my dad, Trunks, and Kakarot is my Saiyan name. Remember? He scowled and tried to get the message across to his best friend. Come on, Trunks, you're gonna blow my story. Goten silently pleaded with the other boy. Ooh, right, Kakarot? I remember now. Trunks plastered a fake grin on his face, hoping to cover his confusion. Goten had to have a reason for wanting him to play along. The boys had gotten into trouble together, and separately, often enough to know when the other needed to lie for him. Ha. Yep, my friend, Kakarot. Glaring suspiciously at the two boys, Vegeta folded his arms across his chest and scowled. Something about this kid bothered the prince. He looked familiar. Somehow. Would someone care to explain what's going on? He growled. Both Goten and Trunks had to stifle a set of giggles. Hearing Chibi Vegeta growl was funny. He couldn't growl nearly so well as his Mirai counterpart did. Fortunately for everyone concerned, they managed to hide their amusement from Vegeta. Trunks looked at Goten, who looked at Bardock, who was looking at the both of them. Goten gulped, remembering all the things Trunks had just been saying. Dragon Balls. Hell, Namek. How did he explain all that without telling anyone about the abilities of the Dragon Balls, or revealing that he and Trunks were from the future? Trunks didn't have a clue what to say, because he didn't know what all was going on. Goten didn't know what to say, because he didn't think he was smart enough to come up with a plausible set of lies. The two Chibas exchanged another look, and nodded. When in doubt, run away, they yelled in unison. Simultaneously, both Trunks and Goten blasted off and out the door of the throne room. Goten paused to grab hold of Bardock's arm and proceeded to fly after his friend at top speed. Bardock was literally swept off his feet and trailing in the air behind Goten, his mind struggling to catch up to what had just happened. The speeds at which they were traveling were almost too much for Bardock to physically handle, and it felt like his arm would be pulled out of its socket. Within a few minutes, the trio was outside the city and in the middle of a forest. The boys slowed down and landed in a small clearing, automatically suppressing their kid. Years of experience had made it almost an instinct to hide their kid after making an escape. One never knew if one would be pursued, after all. Bardock collapsed to the forest floor, his heart racing wildly. The two friends fell to the ground, giggling madly. Hee, did you see the way my dad's eye twitched like that? Oh shit, I forgot. Trunks is Vegeta's son in the future. Bardock groaned and closed his eyes. Haha, I did. He looked just like the older Vegeta. Except my dad's a lot scarier when he does that, 'cause he's a lot more powerful. Yay, hee. Hey, Goten, Kakarot. Trunks lifted his head to look at his friend. If we were stronger than everyone else there, why did we run? Because we didn't want them to find out we're from the future, and we shouldn't tell them about the Dragon Balls. Goten rolled his eyes like this was the most obvious thing in the world. Why didn't you just lie? I'm no good at lying, you know that, Trunks. And besides, you already told them about the Dragon Balls, so we couldn't just not talk about them. If you just waited a minute, Bardock muttered from where he lay, and might have been able to come up with something. Why the hell did you two decide to run? Now we'll all be hunted down, and everyone will be trying to kill us. I don't care how powerful you boys are. I really would rather not be forced to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. Sorry, sir, Trunks apologized, looking at his feet. Bardock, I'm Goten's grandfather. The older Saiyajin sat up and opened his eyes, taking in all the details of the newest addition to party. Besides the limp, purple hair, he really did look like the young Prince Vegeta. It's just that we always run when we get in trouble, Goten explained, grinning sheepishly. Things usually get better after everyone's had a chance to forget about it. Except this time I don't think anyone will be forgetting about it anytime soon, Bardock sighed. You two really landed us in a load of trouble. Oh well, what's done is done, and all we can do about it now is try to figure a way to stay alive without killing everyone on the planet. Leaning against a tree, the warrior glanced at Trunks again, curiously. In the meantime, why don't you tell us your story, Trunks? What did you mean when you said you thought Goten was in hell? And how does someone look for someone else in hell? Trunks took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Well, you see, after Goten made his wish, he just disappeared. So I thought. The conversation went on for a long time as both boys took turns explaining what had happened to them since Goten had made his misinterpreted wish. Despite the lack of visible expression on his face, just by looking at the massive Isu Jin-1 could tell that he was furious. Standing up, he stepped over the bloody remains of the unfortunate messenger. He walked over to the large window that looked out into space. In his hand, the ever-present glass goblet, half filled with dark red wine, shattered into thousands of sparkling shards. Glass and wine dripping down his clenched fist. King Cold ignored the mess. "So someone thinks they can kill my son and get away with it?" He spoke softly. He didn't really care for his son that much, but this was a matter of pride here. A blow to the Cold family was a blow against Cold himself, and therefore must not go unpunished. "Set a course for Vegeta-sei," he said, still speaking in a voice barely loud enough to be heard over the regular hum of the ship. "Those wretched monkeys probably got lucky when they managed to kill my son. They're probably sitting on the mud ball of a planet they call home, laughing about their supposed victory. Well, we'll see who laughs last, now won't we?" A cruel smile graced the features of the father of the late Frieza. Goten's stomach growled loudly. "Dad, I'm hungry," he complained, still in the habit of calling Bardock Dad. "We didn't get to eat lunch because Vegeta made us go to the palace and I'm starving." As if on cue, the other two seeing stomachs present also added their voices to the argument that it was indeed time to eat. "Well, we can't very well go back to my apartment," Bardock mused. "They'll probably have the place watched. Guess we'll just have to find food the old-fashioned way." "No, we don't," Trunks smirked. "Goten, remember that other wish you made? The one for lots of food for us to eat when you thought Grandpa would be brought to Earth?" Goten nodded. "Well, I packed all that food in some capsules. I have them with me, in my pocket." "You do?" The black-haired chibi brightened visibly. He was literally dancing with glee as Trunks pulled out a capsule case and opened it. He pulled out one of the capsules within and held it up for inspection, grinning. "Yep, it's right here. I made sure to pack lots of food because you never know when you'll get hungry and there won't be any food around." Bardock looked at the small, finger-sized container. "It's a little small, isn't it?" he asked, skeptical. "These are horde capsules," Trunks explained. "My mom and Grandpa make them. Here, watch!" He pressed the button on the top of the capsule and gently tossed it onto the ground, not far from them. When the smoke cleared, Bardock thought his jaw was going to drop off. How the hell did all that fit into that tiny little thing? "See?" the 9-year-old asked smugly. "Hate capsules can carry just about anything. For instance, this one's a capsule house. And this one's another spaceship. The one I used to get to Namek couldn't be capsulized, so I left it there. And this one here is a car. I packed lots of things, in case I would need them." Trunks held out one of the containers. Bardock looked at it with extreme interest. "Ingenious," he murmured, holding it between his thumb and forefinger. He reluctantly handed it back to Trunks. He'd have to take a closer look later. Right now, though, Goten had already started making a dent in the pile of food. Trunks and Bardock sat down and attacked the food with a will. It hadn't been as long for Trunks since he'd eaten, but he was Saiyan. He could always eat more. With 3 hungry Saiyan Jin working away at it, it didn't take long for the food to disappear. The 3 leaned back against a tree, a child on either side of Bardock, and let out contented sighs. "You said you had a capsule with a spaceship in it, Trunks?" Bardock asked, his mind in thought. "Would it be big enough for the 3 of us?" "Oh, yeah," the purple-topped kid nodded. "I would have used it instead of the other ship, but the other one was bigger and I was going to be on it for a whole week. I wanted it to have as much room as possible. I hope my mom doesn't get mad that I left it on Namek." Pausing to consider this, the warrior closed his eyes. "Well, we're wanted criminals all over the planet now, and we need to get you 2 back to where you belong, so why don't we use your ship to take us to Earth, or Namek? We could gather the Dragon Balls and use the wish to send you back to the future." "But I left my radar back at your home, Grandpa," Goten suddenly worried. "We can't find the Dragon Balls without the Dragon Radar." "It's okay, Goten," Trunks grinned. "I have Mom's spare radar with me. How do you think I found the Dragon Balls on Namek?" "You'd better not lose that one, Trunks, or your mom will be really mad." "Yeah, right. Like I'd lose the radar. It's the only way we can get home." "Do you really think I'd do what you did and just leave it somewhere?" A flush of embarrassment spread across Goten's cheeks. "It wasn't my fault. I left all my things there when the guards took us to the palace." "Hey, there's no need to argue about it," Bardock said, ruffling the hair on both boys' heads. Why don't we get a good night's sleep and worry about getting off the planet in the morning? I know this forest fairly well, and I know there's a cave nearby that we can sleep in without worrying about being found. I hope there are enough stray animals and Scythians running around out in the wilderness so that scouters won't be able to pinpoint us. These two might be able to hide their key, but I can't... Wait a second. Goten, Trunks, do you two think you might be able to teach me how to hide my key? For about 30 seconds, everyone stared at the door the two boys and the third-class Yejin had vanished through. Once it sunk into their brains what had just happened, the guards all looked to their young prince. Well, what are you morons all standing around staring for? Prince Vegeta roared. Go after them. Bring them back to me alive. It had momentarily slipped the prince's mind that the guards probably couldn't do anything even if they managed to find the three fugitives. They have humiliated me, the royal heir to the throne, and refused to answer my questions. I will break every bone in their bodies and flay their skin from them. They shall die screaming out the secrets they sought to hide from me. I am the Saiyajin Noaji, and I will have my revenge. The chibi snarled wordlessly and threw a small ki blast at the floor near the guards' feet as they all hurried from the room, eager to obey their prince and escape with their lives. Bardock relaxed his muscles as completely as he could, letting tension run off him like water. He was surprised to note that he was actually a lot more tense than he'd thought he was. Maybe it was the stress of being in hiding, or perhaps it was a gradual build-up from living the life of a warrior, always prepared to attack or defend himself. It was kind of nice to be able to let himself loosen up a bit. Of course, even in this, he had a purpose. He opened one eye and looked at Trunks and Goten. Is it working? He asked. Trunks shook his head. Keep working on it. I can still sense you, although you're not as noticeable as before. You gotta relax, Goten added. Let all your energy go. Think of it as pushing it out of your body and spreading it around as far as possible. Frowning, Bardock tried to do as the boys suggested. He imagined himself as a bowl of water with a hole in it, allowing the water, or his ki, to drain out of him. A sudden feeling of something akin to nausea came over him, and he felt almost weak. Needless to say, it took him by surprise. That's it, you're doing it. Trunks crowed triumphantly. He and Goten laughed and did a victory dance, grinning like idiots. Does it always feel like this? Bardock grimaced. He didn't like this feeling at all. Yeah, but you get used to it, Goten confirmed. It gets easier each time you do it. Trunks and me like to play hide-and-seek lots, so we hardly have to think to do it now. Not that Goten thinks that much, anyway, Trunks joked. Hee hee. I like to let Trunks do the thinking, which gets him in more trouble than me, usually. 'Cause everyone knows he's the brains. They usually think it was his idea. The black-haired Chibi Saiyan grinned and rubbed his head. Bardock's mouth quirked upwards after being around warriors and battles for most of his life. It was rather refreshing to spend time with these two mischievous innocents. He suddenly wondered what life on Earth must be like, to produce children such as these. Idly, he wondered how he would have turned out if he had been born there rather than on Vegeta-sei. The smile faded from his face, replaced by a somber look. If he'd been born on Chakyu rather than Vegeta-sei, then he would never have known the hardships of being a soldier, wiping out planet after planet. He would never have known Toma, Silipa, Totepo, or Panbukin. He would never have known Siridwar. He would never have felt the pain of losing his friends and wife. But he would also never have known the joy of having known them. Somehow it evened out, and Bardock was just as glad that he had been born on Vegeta-sei and that he was who he was. The older Satyajin blinked as he suddenly became aware that Goten was sitting in his lap and had his nose inches away from Bardock's. Bardock blinked again. Huh? What are you thinking about? Goten asked curiously. Bardock smiled sadly. About the past, he replied. Things I've done that I wish I hadn't. Things I wish I had done. Friends and family I'll never see again. Saracen fans and family I'll never see again. Saraceni is dead. Kakarot is on Earth, and Raditz is missing. My family seems to be disappearing one by one. All I have now is Goten, and soon I won't even have him. He and his friend Trunks will return to their time, and I will be alone again. He shook his head as though to clear it of the images that haunted him. He smiled and tapped his grandson's nose with a finger. But that's in the past now. Right now, we need to concentrate on surviving long enough to get off this planet. Right? Hey! Goten rubbed his nose and laughed. Bardock-san, my 2-sen, once told me that when he came to Earth, he couldn't sense ki. Can you sense ki? Trunks asked. The earlier mention of hide and seek had triggered a realization that it took two skills to play it the way he and Goten played. One was the ability to hide your ki. They'd just finished teaching that to Goten's grandfather, though it would take some practice before he was any good at it. The perfect way for him to practice would be to play hide and seek with him and Goten, but that would also require the second skill. The ability to sense ki. Nani? Bardock scratched his head in confusion, looking for all the world like every son looked when they didn't get something. That gesture has got to be hereditary, Trunks concluded, a sweat drop forming on the back of his head. Guess I gotta teach you how to do that too. He sighed. Okay, here goes. You know how you push your ki out of your body? Well, sensing ki is kinda like that. Spread out your ki outside your body so that it touches everything around you. Try to spread it out as far as possible, but don't push all of your ki out. You really only need a little bit. Closing your eyes helps you concentrate, because you don't get confused by what your eyes see. Sometimes your eyes can play tricks on you, but your ki to sense rarely lies. The purple-topped cyan boy was racking his brain, trying to remember these lessons from so long ago, when his dad had been trying to teach him this same thing. Every living thing has ki, no matter how small, that can be felt if your ki touches theirs. Like reaching out your hand in the dark and touching someone else. You can't see it, but it's there. Now close your eyes and try to find me with your ki senses. Bardock did as he was told. The sun slipped below the horizon as the lesson continued. Goten curled up in a corner of the cave, bored of watching as his grandfather tried to master the new techniques. It didn't take long for him to fall asleep. About an hour after Goten had fallen asleep, Trunks and Bardock called it quits for the night. The older Saiyan had made remarkable progress, something that Trunks guessed might also be hereditary, because Goku was also a quick study when it came to learning new fighting techniques. Nonetheless, it was tiring work, teaching and learning. Bardock lay down on the sandy floor of the cave, shifting Goten's head so that it lay against his chest, rather than the rock his grandson had chosen as a pillow. Trunks flopped down next to it and, with Bardock's stomach as his pillow, soon followed Goten into the land of dreams. The older warrior smiled as he closed his eyes. He too was soon asleep. Something woke Bardock up during the early hours of the morning. He couldn't say what it was, though. Perhaps it was due to his recent training in sensing K, or perhaps it was because of instincts honed by years of training and fighting. Whatever it was, he knew something was wrong. Senses alert, the warrior got up, making sure to move the two boys gently so as not to wake them. If it was a false alarm, there was no need to make them lose sleep over it, too. If it wasn't, Bardock felt sure he could handle it by himself. He might only be a third-class Saiyan, but his power was actually greater than some elites. He stealthily crept out of the cave, scanning the area with a well-trained eye. Something was not right. He was certain of it. Taking a deep breath, Bardock extended his senses in the manner Trunks had taught him yesterday. He couldn't extend his senses very far yet, but he would welcome any advantage he could find. Wait, there was something there. On the very edge of his newly found Keiki senses. A sense of powerful Keiki approaching. It wasn't as powerful as he was, he thought. He wasn't sure of that last, because he wasn't used to comparing Keiki to his own. He wished he had a scouter, to make sure, but he didn't. He'd left his at his apartment when the prince had summoned him. He decided to trust his feelings and walk towards the unknown Kias, suppressing his own Kias so as to fool any scouters that might be trained in his direction. The element of surprise was something Bardock had come to value over the many years of combat he'd experienced. The stars shone down on him faintly, providing all the light he needed to navigate between the trees and bushes. Any second now he should spot the source of the Kias. The stars were noticeably dimmer and the sky a shade brighter when Bardock suddenly crouched behind a clump of underbrush and scrub. His senses had been right. Someone was directly ahead of him. The cold air prickled his skin as he strained his eyes to make out details on the warrior he faced. The tail swaying back and forth behind him marked him as definitely Saiyan, and he was huge. He couldn't make out distinct facial characteristics, but Bardock could tell the man was also bald. As the giant cautiously stepped through the forest, Bardock noted that he was fiddling with a scouter on his face, turning his head this way and that, as though looking for something. Bardock smirked. Apparently the scouters were being successfully fooled. Here he stood, no more than then paces away from a guard, and he still hadn't been noticed. Bardock blessed his two young friends, and teaching him how to hide his Kiji. With a start, the warrior suddenly realized that the large man was looking in the direction of the cave. Bardock's keen sense of hearing caught a faint beeping sound, and his blood ran cold. He extended his senses back in the direction of the cave, and found that he could sense the key of one of the two boys, which one he couldn't tell. He swore inwardly, using words he'd never repeat in front of either Trunks or Goten, or most people he even liked remotely. For that matter, they'd been discovered. There was only one thing left to do. Faster than the weaker warrior could possibly hope to track, Bardock sped out of hiding and did two things at once. One fist slammed into the larger man's gut. The other reached up and grabbed the scouter off of the guard's face. No need to let him report his discovery. Caught off guard, the enemy doubled over and gagged, a few flecks of blood flying out of his open mouth. Bardock was no longer hiding his kid. He still had the advantage, though, because he could sense kid while his opponent obviously could not. He could only pray to whatever gods might be listening that there were no other Jin nearby whose scouters would pick up the elevated energy signatures. Not wasting any time, Bardock leapt back and launched a roundhouse punch to the other man's face. The other man's ugly face, he noted with disgust. The overlarge, mustachioed face was the kind that even a mother would find hard to love. It looked like a bad rock sculptor had chiseled out a rough map of the face he wanted, and then forgot to smooth the details. Said face became even uglier, if that was possible, as it snarled wordlessly. His opponent blocked the punch with an upraised arm and countered with a knee aimed for Bardock's gut. Dodging to his left, Bardock's leg lashed out and caught the other Saiyan in the ribs. The taller man winced and shrugged off the pain, answering with another punch, this one aimed at Bardock's own stomach. Bardock grabbed the other's wrist and shoved it to one side, his other hand hastily blocking another punch directed towards his face. As though by mutual agreement, the two disengaged and stood a few paces from each other. Breathing slightly harder, in the sky, the sun was just peeking up over the horizon. Only a few stars were left to be seen. "Tell me," Bardock said, grinning. "Who are you? I'd like to know who I'm about to send to hell." "I am Nappa," the giant boomed out, making Bardock wince. He seriously doubted this man had the ability to speak quietly. "I am the prince's personal bodyguard, and," he added with a smirk, "soon to be your executioner." Nappa didn't bother mentioning that he was supposed to bring Bardock and the two chibis in alive. His quarry didn't need to know that particular detail. If Nappa was hoping to scare Bardock with his statement, he was sorely disappointed. Bardock only smirked and launched a rather potent ki blast at him, which he hastily dodged. The ball of energy sailed on behind him until it nailed a tree and exploded. Nothing was left of the tree except smoking cinders and the blackened remains of a stump. "Big talk from a man with a brain too small to find with a microscope," he mocked. "Let's see if you can back up your words with your fists." Nappa roared in rage and launched another flurry of attacks, peppered occasionally by ki blasts, and so the fight continued. Goten yawned and stretched lazily, looking around him as he sat up, his brow furrowed. Where was Bardock? To one side lay Trunks, still asleep, a trickle of drool dangling from the corner of his mouth, but Bardock was nowhere to be seen. The 8-year-old boy leaned over and shook his friend. "Trunks! Trunks! Wake up!" he yelled urgently. Trunks groaned as he rolled over and looked at his friend. "Trunks! Grandpa's gone!" That woke Trunks up the rest of the way. He shot upright and looked around. His eyes lost focus as he extended his keen senses, looking for the distinct power that was Bardock. He gasped as he became aware of the ferocious battle that was occurring only a few minutes away from them. "I sense him! Goten! He's fighting someone over there!" He pointed towards the walls of one of the caves in the direction that he felt Bardock's cane coming from. Goten's gaze followed his, and his eyes too lost focus. "Do you think he's in trouble?" Goten asked, worriedly. He stood up and started towards the cave entrance. "Nah," Trunks reassured his friend. "That power he's fighting isn't as strong as him." "Come on, let's go watch! I haven't gotten to see how your grandpa fights yet. This should be fun." He got up and followed the younger boy out of the cave. The two started dashing towards where the conflict was still going strong. Nappa was strong, he had to give him that. But Bardock was stronger, as well as faster. He formed a ball of energy in each hand, then zanged behind his enemy. He swung his arms together with Nappa's head directly in between where the two Kier balls would meet. The ensuing explosion, as well as Nappa's scream of anger and pain, could be heard for miles around. It wasn't until Bardock was doubled over in pain that he realized he'd gotten cocky and had let his guard down. Nappa had taken advantage of his opponent's weakness and sent an elbow backwards, ramming into Bardock's gut with all the power he could muster. The guard smiled as he noted flecks of blood mixed with saliva fly past his face. "Prepare to die, third-class scum," Nappa grated out, smirking in triumph. "I wouldn't count on it, Baka," Bardock spat out, grinning harshly. He'd noticed something that Nappa hadn't. Two things. Really. The first was that Trunks and Goten had just shown up and were now sitting in a tree at the edge of the clearing where the fight was taking place. The second was even more important, in Bardock's mind. Nappa, in his confidence that he had seriously injured Bardock and would soon win, had just stepped underneath a limb where a lopsided spherical object was hanging. Bardock knew what it was and willing to take advantage of it. Smirking, he lifted a finger and sent a small, pea-sized key blast at the thin connection between the branch and the papery object. Nappa saw the blast coming and laughed. Did Bardock really expect to hurt him with that puny blast? Not only that, but it was poorly aimed as well. He wouldn't even need to move in order to avoid it. In reality, the key was aimed exactly where Bardock wanted it to go. It seared through stem that held the ball up, which promptly fell and landed on Nappa's head. The smaller warrior smirked. On Vegeta-sei, there exists a small stingered insect, rather like the bees of Chakyu. The only differences between the two is that the taper wasps have a limited intelligence and a mild venom in their stingers, as well as the ability to sting their foe multiple times without losing their stinger. The venom was really only a nuisance to a Saiyan, though a rather distracting one, as was the actual sting. The true problem lay within the wasp's intelligence. When their nest was disturbed, they immediately attacked the nearest target and nothing else. In this case, that was Nappa. Bardock noticed the two boys laughing hysterically in the background, and he threw a grin their way. Meanwhile, Nappa was yelling and swatting at the taper wasps, throwing ki blasts randomly, and all in all looking like the idiot he was. Time to end this, Bardock thought to himself. While Nappa was distracted with the pain of the wasp's stings and venom, the spiky-haired Saiyajin powered up a lethal ki blast. He aimed carefully, then threw the sphere of light and energy straight into Nappa's chest. He never even had a chance. Half mad with the venom of thousands of wasp stings, Nappa never even saw it coming. When the light of the explosion faded, the only thing left behind was a smoking crater and the charred remains of what had once been the loyal bodyguard of the young Prince Vegeta. Inhaling deeply, Bart turned away from the grisly scene and looked at the two boys. Trunks looked disturbed, and Goten looked like he was going to be sick. As much as the two boys loved to fight and had been fighting most of their lives, this was the first time they had actually witnessed something like this. Majin Buu was one thing. He was a monster, who looked like a wad of bubblegum shaped into the semblance of being. This was different. They had just seen a man, human enough in appearance, burnt to a crisp, the sickly sweet smell of burning flesh permeating the air. Goten gagged, his stomach trying to heave up anything that remained of last night's dinner, which wasn't much. Trunks was pale and trembling, though he looked better than Goten. Bardock walked up to the two boys and knelt before them. He pulled both of them against his chest and patted their backs. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he murmured. Neither boy responded as they clung to him. Bardock held them for a few more moments before he released them. "We need to find another place to hide," he said, trying to draw their minds away from the events of the morning. "I don't know if anyone else is nearby, but if there is, then their scouters probably picked up the energy from my fight." He hurriedly suppressed his ki once more and stood up. "We can't use that ship of yours, Trunks. If there are a bunch of Saiyajin hanging around..." He ruffled the hair on both boys' heads as he started off in another direction. "You kids didn't leave anything in the cave, did you?" "No," Trunks shook his head. "I have all my capsules and everything with me. And I didn't have anything besides what I'm wearing," Goten added. Bardock nodded. "All right then, let's get moving. I think I know of another place we can hide in until things settle down a bit."